Well, a man called me. His name was Mr. Brown from Independent Petro, which I believe is down on Shoto Avenue in St. Louis. Said he had some waste oil that he wanted me to haul, and he never would tell me where it was. I kept saying, well, where's this at? He said, well, it's a long ways from here. I said, well, if it's a long ways from here, I got to know how far it is, because I don't think I can haul it for nothing if it's too far, and if it's way far, I can't haul it at all. See, oil then was only worth a nickel a gallon.
The first time we came down, I guess, and they put up the first dioxin sign, was right down there. And I'll never forget my daughter, my youngest daughter, seeing it, and she cried.
You were still here at that time?
Well, right after they put it up, we could still come in, but we couldn't stay. And she hates them signs. She says, if there's ever a sign I hate, it's that one that says dioxin. Don't get out of the car, don't roll the windows down, don't do this. She says, this is mine, and they're telling me what to do.
So finally, he sent me a sample in the mail. I never forget, I got it in the mail, and it was a little bottle, looked like a peanut butter, Skippy's peanut butter bottle. It was real big and round and about that big, I'd say about a half a quart. And I never forget, I took it in my kitchen and put it in the sink, and put it on some paper, and I set it on fire in the sink on just a little tiny piece of paper. I wadded it up, about 6 inches long. And then I took it on my finger and put it to my lips and tasted it. And I told my wife, Evelyn, I said, you know, that's pretty good oil. Burns good, don't look like it has any water content in it. Maybe I can haul that oil for them.
My youngest daughter wanted to come back for a long time. She says, I just want to go look one more time, just one more time. And now she won't even talk about it. That was our ballpark. Spent a lot of hours there. Girlfriend of mine used to bring our barbecue pit and have the hot dogs, and we sold potato chips and the beer and the soda and everything for our ball games. We had a good old time here. These trees could talk. The people that lived in this house here used to trim my dogs. She used to trim poodles and dogs, and she used to trim my poodles before we had them put to sleep. And they've moved off. I think they're in Texas now.
What was wrong with the poodle?
My one poodle had epilepsy and had a heart attack, and the other one had tumors. And we had to have her put to sleep. And the one I've got now also has epilepsy. This house right here, a very good friend of my daughter's, lived in it, and she lost her twins about the same time my daughter lost hers. And they're both expecting now, and we know they're going to have healthy babies this time, we hope. And that's my house right there. And there's my cedar trees. Underneath that. Believe me, my yard never looked like that when I was there.
Our family at that time consisted of myself and my wife and our 3 children, okay? And, 2 girls and a boy. And we were very happy, very content. And that, in my mind, was going to be our family. That was our family structure. It was already set up. Now was to enjoy the fruits of our labor, enjoy a good life. So we were looking to the future in that community. That's where we were going to plan to spend at least a substantial part of our life there. And that was all changed in a second. I mean, just overnight, that was changed. That became an impossibility.
The 5-man sampling team should be here in Times Beach a week or more, working 12-hour days. EPA officials asked city officials to arrange for this informal meeting to warn residents men in white suits will be in their community taking samples in the morning. EPA officials confirmed what the residents knew. Times Beach is a suspected dioxin-contaminated site. The testing of Times Beach was moved ahead of some other Missouri sites when EPA officials were notified city workers had become ill after digging a drainage ditch in 1980, and other residents were reporting illnesses and skin rashes. If dioxin contamination is shown to be positive in those tests, then more extensive testing will be done. Kathy Leonard, Channel 5 Eyewitness News in Times Beach.
Right here on the corner up here is where they landed the helicopter. And I came out here to go to my mailbox, and they said, no, you can't go because this is contamination. So they did a little test right along here somewhere. But at first, I thought it was a big joke. You know, you look out, you always heard of the Martians landing, and I says, hey, I got some rain, the Martians landed. But then after we found out what it was about, this is the first we knew about it. Then once we found out what it was, then it got serious. Then you start thinking.
In 1972 and 1973, more than 100,000 gallons of waste oil was sprayed on the city's streets. Most of the streets at that time were unpaved, and the oil was supposed to control dust. The EPA says that oil may have been tainted with dioxin. Residents are concerned, but they are glad the EPA is finally doing something about it.
It's apparent to us now, finding that they're going to do something. It just scares us to death as to what they're going to do.
It's very expensive to test for. There are a limited amount of laboratories throughout the whole country that can do the analyses. The analyses are expensive, and as you say, we have no portable equipment, no magic wand that we can stick in the ground and tell us what's here. It's laborious and slow and time-consuming.
And since we were uncomfortable with this, Russell Bliss, the waste oil hauler, had told me that you could get the streets tested yourself and it would only cost about $1,200. And I even asked him where I could go to have this done, and he told me about a lab. So I immediately got the idea that maybe between the business community and the residents, we could collect enough money to do our own testing and get the test results back much sooner.
They must have a pretty good reason to suspect there's something here, to be taking the precautions that they're taking. But yet they're not stopping me from my free travel in and out of this area. I live here. They're not really saying anything to me. They're not talking or anything like that. I'm not sure really what's going on, you know, other than they're wanting to take soil samples. And I'm beginning to think, well, they know what they're going to take the soil samples for. Then it would seem to me like it should take a very short time to get an analysis of what this is. It must be very hazardous.
The EPA says there might be as many as 41 sites around the state contaminated with dioxin, including a horse arena near Fenton and 2 residential areas in Imperial. At today's hearing, EPA Deputy Director Art Spratland was questioned extensively by the elected officials. Over and over, he was asked to explain the possible health hazards facing people who live near the contaminated sites.
From the health point of view, we have tried to say avoid contact with the area. And
does that mean move from their home, move from the property?
No, we have not said move from your home at this particular point, no.
What are you saying?
Saying number one, don't go out and eat the dirt.
Although all the questions may not have been answered at today's hearing, the EPA definitely got the message from Missouri's elected officials, and that is to speed up the testing of the contaminated sites and make the Missouri dioxin problem a priority for the EPA. Dan Gray, Channel 5 Eyewitness News, Hillsboro.
We began to share stories with each other in the community and begin to compare notes of personal injuries, of health problems, of problems that we'd had with animals, that these things had, you know, we might have had a dog die, and that didn't seem consequential within itself. But when we began to compare it with the neighbor who lived 3 blocks over and realized that that story happened to them as well, and the squirrels without tails and jumping from one tree to another and missing. That seemed comical when we saw it as one incident at a time, but when we began to notice that this was happening all over town, then we began to take it seriously.
I remember driving home from work on a Thursday afternoon, and I had the radio on, and I remember hearing the Corps of Engineers warning the people in the low-lying areas that there was going to be a flood and they needed to evacuate. And I came up on the city park where 2 residents had become ill when they were putting in a drainage ditch. The odor was really bad and the ground was a purplish color. And I remember saying to these people that were collecting the soil samples for the EPA that the city was going to flood. And this one man from the EPA that was collecting the soil samples said, "This community can't flood." They hurried and took their samples. I remember they finished their sampling on Saturday morning, and around 3 o'clock on Sunday, Times Beach was just inundated by floodwaters.
When the water from the rampaging Merrimack River poured through Times Beach, Missouri early in December, it was called the flood of the century. But the news from federal health officials may be worse than the flood. Officials at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta say preliminary testing shows Times Beach is contaminated with a chemical waste, dioxin. The recommendation is that no one should live here, and even cleanup workers should evacuate. Times Beach Mayor Sidney Hammer moved back into his house this week with his wife, mother, and father, and they plan to stay.
The only way I'm leaving here is if they carry me out, forcibly. I stood out there and watched them spread it. I inhaled it. That 10 years ago, I'm still here. I'm going to stay.
The effect of dioxin on humans is disputed, and Missouri Lieutenant Governor Kenneth Rothman disputes the entire 10-year-long investigation.
It's no wonder that people have a distrust of the EPA in Washington. I do. I mean, there's a real confidence crisis. 10 years have gone by before the order to evacuate.
Rothman says if there is a problem, he'll ask the federal government to clean it up with money from the so-called Environmental Superfund. Ron Majors for NBC News.
The Commissioner of Health for the city of St. Louis made a public announcements to all residents of Times Beach that moved into the city. We've got a place we want you to bring down to your toothbrush, your underwear. Bring it and give it to us so that we can destroy it. And it was this ideal that even the clothes on your back was contaminated. And we were told that where we lived was contaminated, what we had was contaminated, and we must get out of there, but there was no place to go to. That's where the message stopped.
I just couldn't believe that I was hearing that. It was an evacuation of a whole town, and me being a part of it, it just seemed so foreign to me. I mean, it's just like something you'd see maybe in a movie, you know, that was made for movies, not something you experience in real life.
You know, I'm not playing stupid or anything, but I didn't go to high school. I didn't graduate from high school. I only charged $5 a barrel to haul it away. And you didn't care what it was because you put it on a truck. I worked I've never had a pair of gloves on handling that stuff. So I must have convinced myself there was nothing wrong with it. You didn't think about anything being hazardous. Didn't have it on the barrel. They didn't say it was hazardous, and I wasn't aware it was hazardous, so you roll the barrels on the truck and go to landfill and roll them off. Throw them in a big hole. I mean, it was just a way of doing things.
Missouri's dioxin problem started here in Verona, in southwest Missouri. In the late 1960s and early 70s, the Northeast Pharmaceutical and Chemical Company produced unknown amounts of dioxin as an unwanted byproduct in the manufacture of a face cleanser. The plant went out of business. That brought this man into the picture.
My name is Russell Martin Bliss.
Bliss, now a former hauler of salvaged oil, was hired at that time to haul away the chemical waste from Verona. He maintains that he was never told that the waste was dangerous.
I wouldn't have known what it was if they had told me what it was. If you want the truth, you could tell me it was some kind of a new jelly and I'd put it on toast and eat it. But I didn't know what dioxin was and still don't know exactly what it is.
Officials say dioxin was sprayed in several places throughout Missouri and possibly across the Mississippi in Illinois. In the early 1970s, Bliss sprayed the Bubbling Springs Ranch near Fenton to keep the dust down. He also sprayed the unpaved streets of Times Beach and his own farm. The oil contained dioxin.
Judy Piot is here. She's from Wright City, Missouri. That's Times Beach area. Can we say that?
Near there.
How close are you?
About 30 miles.
You have a farm.
I have a small
stable.
farm now.
How long ago did this happen? I mean, when did you first notice it?
1971.
Is this the same horse?
Yes, sir.
Right, let me just show the camera. You've heard, there's just one of her animals. And then what happened? The guy came and sprayed and said he'd kill the flies and...
Sprayed for dust, to control the dust in the horse arena.
This is pretty grim. Look at the weight loss here. How many animals did you lose?
62.
You had sparrows almost falling out of the sky, didn't you?
They did fall out.
Now, if deformed colts are being born in your area as a result of what is beginning to look like the indiscriminate distribution of toxic material, we can only wonder when it will strike the human community, whose genes and biochemistry is being altered, perhaps for unknown generations hence. And I assume you probably were the kind of person like most of us who, this goes back to 71, doesn't it? Yeah. You probably said, oh, God. You certainly didn't have any sense of urgency about this when it was happening.
Well, that was my business, was horses. I felt very frightened, but I didn't know what was wrong.
Scientists agree that dioxin is highly toxic and causes short-term reactions in humans. Some people develop an ugly skin condition called chloracne. Others suffer temporary nerve or liver damage. But tiny amounts of dioxin can kill some laboratory animals and cause birth defects, rashes, nerve disorders, liver dysfunctions, or cancers. The issue is, what does it do to humans?
The government officials weren't able to handle the people from the very beginning. There was no program in place for how to deal with people in these situations. They would send out various representatives, an engineer, to tell us about dioxin. But what good did it do to really tell us about it? It didn't get us back in our homes. It didn't get our lives back started over again. It didn't correct any of the immediate problems we were facing.
Mayor Sid Hammer then explained a map depicting the location of dioxin levels that are known, street by street. The test results that are in so far show most test sites measuring more than the 1 part per billion experts consider dangerous. Some townspeople are upset that it has taken this long to get results of pre-flood tests and that they have to wait still longer for answers.
If I was sitting there representing the people, which I'm not doing, and I don't want the job, I'll guarantee you, if I had to go with my own money, I'd go to D.C. But I'll tell you that there was 8,000 people, 5,000 people down here that needed some help, and they need it now.
We're doing the best we can, and I'm asking the man from the EPA if he's here. If you don't like it, you leave the beach.
They would ask us, well, what's it mean to me? You know, what about my health? What about my children's health? What about my grandchildren's health? What do I do? I've had this car, for an example. It's been in the town, and I just happened to be in it when the word came out. How do I clean it up? Is it safe to even use, to sit on the cloth seats? I don't know. And so instead of being honest and saying, well, do the best you can, vacuum it up, we'll study that and get back to you. Bullshit, we never got back to them. we'd ignore them.
We were all excited when the government was getting involved with us. The people from Love Canal were saying, those poor people from Times Beach. And we couldn't understand their sarcasm or their attitude toward us. Well, we're finally getting somebody to help us. But they knew it, and now we know it.
It was just bureaucracy. For the first time in a lot of people's lives, they got to experience bureaucracy firsthand. And it wasn't a pleasant experience.
I am strictly issuing a challenge to the President of the United States to come down here and talk to myself as the mayor. If he is afraid to do it, let us know so we can try and get help from somebody else or some other nation.
Assistant EPA Administrator Rita Lavelle defended her agency's actions.
In the Missouri situation, again, we are still in the process of gathering information to make a decision. Our approach is proper legally. It's the best approach for the people. And I would suggest that it's an approach that we've used a number of times. We are not afraid to move out in an emergency situation.
She promised action as soon as the facts were in. But Wyden and Feigenbaum were not satisfied.
One, they should have evacuated those people as soon as they knew there were any dangerous levels of dioxin at all. Why in the hell didn't they do it 4 years ago or 8 years ago, as soon as they knew?
If they would just give some positive thoughts or information about it, I think we could all feel a lot better about it. But everything is just one day it's one thing and another day it's another story.
It's really disturbing to me to think that I'm living here and I really don't know what the health of my health would be in the future or anything of that kind. And what can we really do about it?
Some residents at the news conference said they would not take part in the relocation. One resident made an emotional plea, asking the government to buy their houses so they could move out permanently.
I mean, we have children down there that we're really concerned about. And I think the people in Washington would get the feeling that we have for our children. Maybe something we get done. We want out. We don't want a temporary move. We want out. When I leave my house, I want to be gone for good.
We stayed with my relatives for a while, and then we did eventually end up in government housing. I wasn't sure what the general public's fear was of being around someone who was from that town, or fear of being around, say, our vehicle parked next to them from that town with the Times Beach city sticker on it.
One man that owned a business in Times Beach had owned the business for a long time. One of his first customers would refuse to shake hands with him. He asked him not to drive his trucks onto his property because they had the name of his business in Times Beach, Missouri written on them. Another man went into a McDonald's restaurant and somebody up in the waiting area said, "I know you, I've seen you on TV, you're from Times Beach." And he said yes, thinking that he found someone that he could talk to. And he said that he stood there in that waiting area at McDonald's and watched the whole restaurant vacate.
Nobody talked to us. We were in a place all by ourselves. And it stayed that way. But it wasn't only that. It was a snide remarks of, they're going to glow in the dark. Let them come out after dark and see if they glow. Don't get near them. You can catch it.
I felt that unless directly questioned, I would not tell anybody where I was from. I would just assume that they not know, that they would just know me as a new person in the community.
We did begin to stage events. We had a protest on the highway. Of course, that would draw media attention. The message we were wanting was, buy us out, Reagan, buy us out. That's Marilyn Leisner. We need answers now. The Missouri state motto, the welfare of the people shall be the supreme law. All of these stand in stark contrast to what was going on at that time. They took the trash but left the people. What's the price of your child's future? We're tired of living out of suitcases. We want our homes. So the desperation of the people was very real.
It's frustrating, very frustrating.
started out when you were 10 years old to save money to go in business, and you've obtained a little bit, not maybe as much as other people, but you've obtained a little bit, and overnight you wake up, find out your net worth is zero.
Tomorrow, these businessmen and others from Times Beach will be on hand for the Reagan appearance in the convention center, having paid $20 each for the luncheon. They hope, they say, to get a chance to call the president's attention to their plight.
It was at that point that our governor flew to Washington and talked with President Reagan, and then the announcement came on February 22nd that the buyout was going to take place.
While the announcement was being made to the media behind closed doors, some 200 Times Beach residents were informed of the buyout proposal secondhand.
The federal officials today were carefully shielded by guards from the people of Times Beach, waiting outside the news conference room, and the officials left by a back passageway after a 20-minute news conference. They had briefed a few Times Beach officials privately before that conference.
The government's plan for a buyout of Times Beach is expected to be ready in about 3 weeks. The residents are anxious to see that plan and even more anxious to get a check in their hand for their homes. Kathy Leonard, Channel 5 Eyewitness News in Eureka.
Today, old friends got together. Times Beach residents have reunited to celebrate the Christmas they missed. There was music and food and dancing. But for many Times Beach residents, like Chuck Yarborough and his family, the hard times are not over.
We're still in temporary housing, located up in Pacific. We've had the house appraised, but so far, we've got no response on it.
When they come down and appraise them, they don't give you no money offers or anything like that. You know, they just say, well, we'll take it back, and we're going to get together, and we're going to call you someday, and we're going to give you a price. But, you know, it's just like the day we moved out, we're still up in the air. We know no more today than what we did 8 months ago.
See, you telling America that you, what was the other evidence of, do you believe your phone was bugged as well?
Certainly monitored.
All right, let's, here comes Hugh Kaufman, who says he's doing his job as an investigator and as the man who started this whole attempt to find out where these hazardous waste dumps were. Business is going to lunch with the power brokers in Washington and saying, look, this is hysterical, nobody's died yet, I feel fine. How do you prove it? A white mouse is not a human being. The white coat guys are running around saying the sky is falling, and it's not really true. It's subject to proof. And here comes Kaufman saying that the danger is now. And to prevent his, he is alleging, to prevent his enthusiastic enforcement of environmental laws, he was followed in an attempt to discredit his own character. They took his picture as he entered a motel room in the company of a brunette. Mr. Kaufman and his entire family is pleased to have the record show that the brunette was his wife. That was the only thing.
That's right. Basically, for those of you who don't know who I am, I was one of the people who started the toxic waste program at EPA over 10 years ago. I found out through my investigation and through whistleblowers this past year that high political appointees of the Reagan administration, in one of the tacks that they were using to put EPA in the bag, was to check out my sexual habits when they were
You're saying Ed
managing
Meese
the
picked
governor.
up the phone and said, let's get the goods on Kaufman? That's a very serious charge, Mr. Kaufman.
I did not say pick up the phone. I'll find that out when I put everybody under oath next week.
There obviously is a breach between ourselves, the governing body of the nation, and the executive branch.
Burford became the highest-ranking presidential appointee ever held in contempt by the House, and things started coming apart. Accusations of wrongdoing flowed from the agency, an assistant administrator named Rita Lavelle got fired and became the object of an FBI investigation. 2 other EPA officials remain under intense investigation. Assistant Administrator John Todhunter, accused of improper meetings with industry officials, and General Counsel Robert Perry for keeping ideological ratings of fellow employees. And congressional investigators discovered there had been shredders at the agency. Shredders. Democrats were having a field day.
Ann Burford went to Times Beach, not because she cared about the people, but for political purposes, to try and help get her off the hot seat of this major probe by Congress that could have landed her in jail. What the industry wants are administrators of EPA who are very quiet, refined, dignified, who will not directly compromise the system, but do it quietly and indirectly, while at the same time on the surface appearing like they care about the environment. Those are the types of administrators industry likes. Those are the type of administrators that are let into the club.
We're amateurs dealing with professionals, okay? Our drive is our sense of what is right, what is, you know, bottom line. This is my life. Their drive is what's politically expedient. What is, you know, will cause the less amount to be blasted on the 10 o'clock news tonight. What will cause less harm to this administration. That's their viewpoint.
In 1983, the United States invaded Grenada, and all for the ideal of, you've got a few of our students down there, and we're going to send the force of the entire United States military to bring back and rescue these few students. And that was such a wonderful thought, that our government stands at the ready, that if there's one of us that needs help, it's there to help us. But we were going through our situation at that time, and we realized that there probably was something else to the story of the invasion of Grenada, because it's not that idealistic, that the government just not come in like a knight in white shining armor and rescue people and then ride off into the sunset.
Key is control, controlling the game so that the public health and environment is not number one on the government agenda. The financial protection of the major chemical companies, the major polluters, is number one on the agenda.
I was really mad at Russell Bliss first, because I said, you took away everything that I ever worked for and I ever loved, and now I don't have anything. But I really think deep down he's probably hurting just as much as the rest of us, because I don't think anybody'd go out and do this on purpose. I mean, there can be mean people in the world, but I don't think they'd go out just to destroy a whole town.
You can ask the average person, say, do you know where Russell got the oil from? And they can't tell you. And do you know who he hauled it for? And they couldn't tell you that. I think the majority of people don't know who Northeastern Pharmaceutical Company is. They don't know who any of those people are. Only thing they remember is Russell Bliss spread it. Well, like I tell everybody from day one, I didn't manufacture one drop of that oil.
What lies along the roads in Times Beach came from here, a chemical plant in Verona, Missouri. Dioxin waste from a hexachlorophene process had been secretly dumped in many places near Verona, among them this farm site, which underwent some cleanup by EPA in 1980. The soil was dug up, but today it still remains stored in barrels at the site at levels up to 2 million parts per billion, or more than 6,000 times the levels at Times Beach. On the chemical company site itself in the middle of Verona, outdoor tanks today contain more than 10,000 gallons of dioxin-contaminated liquid at levels up to 500 parts per billion. In burial sites along the nearby Spring River, preliminary tests show dioxin at 62 parts per billion. Former chemical company workers say they fear that may mean rumors of hundreds of barrels buried deep underground there may be true. And the Spring River itself, which flows to Oklahoma, has dioxin in its sediment and in its fish. One dairy farmer whose cows drink from the river thinks the dioxin contamination is the reason his cows keep dying and losing calves. EPA officials say their tests show that is not the cause, but the farmer lives less than a quarter mile from the chemical plant. There are no Superfund monies allocated for Southwest Missouri. EPA has said it is satisfied with its action here, though many tests remain to be done and many questions remain to be answered. Erin Hayes in Verona, Missouri for NBC News.
The initial way that I got involved in the Times Beach cases was via Marilyn Leisner, who's the trustee of Times Beach and formerly the mayor. And in the 1960s, there was a company in Springfield and Verona, Missouri, called Hoffman Taff that made Agent Orange for use in Vietnam. Then the government went out of the Agent Orange business, and Hoffman Taff was left with a holding tank that contained some dioxin as a residue. They then negotiated with a company in the East Coast called Napaco, and Hoffman Taft was going to lease them out half of one building. Hoffman Taft is called Hoffman Taft at this time, but it's already been in negotiations with Syntex. Essentially, at this point, Syntex is running the show. They bring out Napaco to start making hexachlorophene, and hexachlorophene again produces dioxin in its manufacture, and it goes into the still residue tank. Then they get an offer from IPC, or Independent Petrochemical Corporation, to take the material to a hazardous waste site. They then contract with Russell Bliss to do the hauling for them.
Me and Delbert Askew went and got it together. We drove down there and got the oil, and it looked like real good oil. And then he called me and asked me if I want to haul some more, and I said yes, but I'm going to charge you $0.05 a gallon to haul it. He said that'd be fine, didn't hesitate nothing.
Meanwhile, Napaco pays IPC 25 cents for every gallon of dioxin that's taken off their facility. IPC, meanwhile, pays Russell Bliss 5 cents a gallon. So every time Russell Bliss picks up a gallon, IPC makes 20 cents. Now, the IPC story is that Russell Bliss has told them that he was taking the material to an atomic waste site in Rolla, Missouri, which is fairly ludicrous. I doubt that there are any atomic waste sites in Missouri. In any case, there wasn't one in Rollo, and even though they've testified to it, they certainly didn't check it out.
It never entered my mind what they were doing or what they were making. I was told at one time they were making ladies' face cleanser. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I know one time some of the workers down there said, "What do you do with this old oil?" And I said, "Well, I spray it in horse arenas and sell it for re-refined oil, and they make heavy industrial fuel out of it and spray it on country roads," and nobody said nothing.
So did they all know that they had this toxic material and they didn't care? That's one possibility. Or did they all not bother to tell each other what it was? That's another possibility. And it's hard to go back into people's minds in 1971 to say what they were doing. But the result is they certainly didn't care about it.
I look back at it, I know it was wrong now, but that was the way everybody did it. I mean, you could call up the FBI, the local police department, the fire department, and say, "Hey, I'm going to the landfill with 50 barrels of slop." And they said, "Well, what are you calling us for?" I mean, I never did do that, but that's what they would. If I'd had dioxin printed on the side of my truck, nobody would say anything about it because nobody knew what it was in 1971. Nobody that I'm aware of. The government said he didn't know what it was when he sprayed it on our boys in Vietnam.
I'll
tell you what, if you want people to be assured, first of all, you better find out who is exposed, how much they're exposed, and get your show together before you start doing a damn study.
They've been told by CDC, by EPA, by everybody, this is the most dangerous thing in the world. Dioxin is 2,000 times more deadly than cyanide. And then they tell the people not to worry. So they've torn them literally back and forth.
I was relating to Congress what was happening to my daughter LaDonna, the lips swelling even with the nose and the eyes swelling and the hives all over the body and the rashes. And a man from another side that I didn't even know and I'd never heard of until that day in Washington, D.C., his wife was there, and his wife was relating to Congress the very same things happening to her husband that were happening to my daughter. And at that point, it was impossible for me to ever change my mind that this dioxin didn't cause any of these problems.
My grandson here is 18, and he's deaf. He's totally deaf. This little granddaughter just turned 10, and she's had leukemia since she's 3. These are my children. They're all in this area except this one here, and they're all doing pretty good right now. My girls have all got female problems, but we haven't found out the results for them yet. I think I've got one. This is their dad, and he lived on Times Beach also. He died in 87. He used to drive his car down every day and turn it around down the guard shack up here. And finally, Bill told him one day, go home, just go. And he started across the bridge, and he couldn't do it. And he come back and just sat in the parking lot and cried for a long time, and then he went home. And that was his last trip. And he just ended up killing himself.
Here's the week of May 21st that we were presenting medical testimony, and this was near the close of our medical case, when an article came out in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and we're talking about headlines that are the type of headlines you get when World War II ends. I mean, it's a banner headline. This is dioxin scare now called mistake. We were prepared for some kind of publicity. We didn't think it would go to this end. It quotes Dr. Vernon Houck of the CDC as saying that the dioxin scare was a mistake and that dioxin was overrated as a health problem. On investigation, what surprised us is that the comments that were reported with this banner headline in the front page of the Post-Dispatch during our trial and while we're presenting medical testimony were actually made a year before by Dr. Houck in testimony before Congress. And the same paper on July 27th, 1990 had published the same statements by Dr. Houck and then put it on page 21 in a rather small article. But for some reason, this 1 year later, they reprint the same story, and it's a banner headline.
Vernon Houck obviously was accommodating somebody who wanted these statements to come out in the press at those critical times because it would affect the outcome of the litigation in Times Beach. And Vernon Houck has done this in other instances where dioxin polluters have needed assistance. For instance, the pulp and paper industry wanted to weaken the Georgia dioxin standards. Houck very conveniently, even though this was not part of Houck's official duties or anything to do with what he was supposed to be doing for the Centers for Disease Control, very obligingly wrote on Centers for Disease Control letterhead a letter in support to EPA for weakening Georgia's dioxin standards.
The conference that Vernon Houck made these statements at was under the auspices of Armin Yanders, and Armin Yanders is quoted in this article. Now, what the article didn't mention is that a great deal of Armin Yander's dioxin studies had been funded by Syntex Agribusiness. In fact, they had provided Armin Yanders with $204,000 to do his studies. And Armin Yanders is the man that's running this conference that brings Vernon Houck out to make these statements.
I think on the issue of dioxin, it's impossible to be too careful about who is paying for a study, who is hosting a conference. There's so many tentacles of so many interests involved. As I said before, the issue of dioxin is so highly political because of the connection with Agent Orange and the issue of government liability for people's health for the next 50, 100 years, that you can't be too careful in trying to figure out where a study came from, whose payroll a scientist was on, what is independent information, and is there such a thing as truly independent scientific inquiry into this issue?
Here's the headline that the St. Louis Post-Dispatch runs when they say dioxin might not be harmful. But when a jury finds that somebody was killed by dioxin, in page 4, section D in the obituaries, the same paper runs a headline saying, jurors award $1.5 million to cancer victims' family. As if the tragedy or the story was cancer, when the case was that dioxin caused that cancer. Dioxin's not in that headline.
The newspaper industry would be highly motivated to give the appearance or convince the public that dioxin is less toxic than previously thought. Newspapers, in large part, own pulp and paper mills. Pulp and paper mills are your largest dioxin polluters in this country. For instance, the New York Times is currently being sued. New York Times owns a pulp and paper mill itself. They are being sued because of dioxin pollution. So of course there's a reason for the newspaper industry to detoxify dioxin. It affects all these lawsuits. It's money, plain and simple.
Well, for many years we had to drive by and see the deserted buildings. And I thought immediately with my children, I thought, well, what do they think when they drive by there and see the town they used to live in, just deserted and just decaying, you know, just sitting there and decaying like that. And I thought, what a shame. It really is a shame, but it does teach a lesson. It teaches that there is a price to pay for man's wrongdoing. That town's paying the price. It paid the price. It just sat there and went to decay.
The lawsuits have been settled now, and they're saying the people of Tynes Beach got rich. But you gotta stop and think of what the people of Tynes Beach lost. They've lost their homes, they've lost memories, they've lost things that can never be replaced. And I guess everybody's got a right to their feeling, but I don't think we got anything we didn't deserve.
We're in Tynes Beach. I'm standing on Hawthorne Street, and this is Orchid over here and Dahlia in this direction. After the incinerator has been permitted and brought on site, the contaminated soils from the other 26 sites will be brought here and incinerated along with the soils from Tynes Beach itself. The soil will be placed in pits on site and covered with 2 feet of clean soil. Once all the incineration has been completed, the incinerator will be demobilized, decontaminated, and then removed from the site.
This is the way that we've handled the material from 10 of the 26 sites that will be taken to Tynes Beach. The material's been excavated, put in these bags, and stored in these buildings until the incinerator's ready at Tynes Beach. 16 of the other sites still are not excavated. Most likely they will not be handled in this fashion. They will be bulk hauled to Times Beach for incineration.
I'm from the school of get the people out of there, contain the site the best way you can, fence it in, put a blacktop on it, and not let that property change hands ever again until the hazardous material has degraded to safe levels, whether that's 1,000 years, 10,000 years, or whatever. But I think the American people are being sold a bill of goods to think that there's enough money and the technology exists to fully clean up all of these hazardous sites around the United States. And I think that issue is being used to focus the public's attention away from regulatory activities which must be done to prevent the creation of these types of sites in the future.
I don't see anybody going to jail. I never see justice being performed by the EPA. I don't. Fines are great. They're great detriments to doing something. But I never see them going to jail. And I think it's criminal too. You know, I think it's criminal in the most degree in that not only are you harming the earth, but you're harming human beings and you're disrupting their whole lives. Forever. For their whole life, we carry this around with us.
I try not to think about it a lot, because if you dwell on the fact that you've been exposed to a chemical and that there is potential for health problems in the future, I think you could really mess up your life if you really dwelled on it a lot. But always in the back of your mind, every time your kid sneezes or gets a rash or is ill, you think, well, could that be because of what I passed on to them through the pregnancy? Kyle had chronic ear infections, and I think, oh, you know, could his bad ears be from me? I have all along thought that the chemical companies were responsible for all of this. I feel like Bliss Oil was used as a scapegoat for the chemical companies to get rid of the substance that they didn't know what to do with. I really think if it were somebody in their family, if it were their sons and daughters or their grandchildren that were affected, maybe their tune would be a little bit different. I think bureaucrats and government people can't know what it feels like to wonder every day whether or not your children are going to grow up healthy. And I think they can't know what it's like to have your home taken away and replaced by a dollar figure. It just... It's like they're trying to just take that away like it never really happened. Just, oh, erase Times Beach from the map and that'll make everything okay.
My daughter Sandy made this for me right after the flood, and most of it is pertaining to the flood or right before the flood or when the kids were little. This is our Times Beach water tower, and I hope it always stays there so we'll know. This is my kids in a snowstorm when they were little, and this was taken along our house. My kids sit and they talk and they say, what are we going to tell our kids when they get big enough to say, Dad, where were you born? Mom, where did you live? Then what are you going to tell them? We lived in a town that they tore down and they took it off the map and now it's not there. My youngest daughter, I think she's a lot better now, but she still misses Times Beach. And she, like she says, they can do what they want. They can take it off the maps. They can quit talking about it. But her home is Times Beach. And if you ask her where she's from, she's going to say Times Beach. I'm 100% sure of that. She'll always say, I am from Times Beach.